Hello and welcome to Mac More Literacy with me, Miss Mac Mullen. This week we're looking at words from geography and we're looking at some really important words. So, see you on the other side of the titles. Hello, this week we are looking at climate, redevelop, and we are looking at conservation. So let's dive straight in and get started with climate. Now, the definition of climate is the weather. So my definition here says the prevailing weather or the weather prevailing, but the weather that is really typical of an area, or if there's a sudden change of weather, that's what we're discussing. So the climate, the overall weather somewhere. Now, weather can involve things like precipitation, that means rain. It can involve humidity, that's how damp the air feels, how much water there is in the air just all the time. You know, when you go on holiday somewhere and it always just feels very close and very lots of water, whereas other places can feel really dry. So that's part of the climate. How windy it is, how fast the wind is, that's wind velocity. How sunny it is, how cloudy it is. All things like that, they all go together to make up the weather, to make up the climate. So what I'd like you to do is to fill out this Freya model. So you've just heard the definition, so if you could write that down. If you could come up with some characteristics, so some things that make up the climate, I've listed quite a few just then. If you can think of some examples of different climates, so you might want to say different countries and what the climate is like there. And some non-examples, some things that are not climate. And if you pause the video now to do that. And here's what I've put. So for definition, of course, the weather conditions prevailing. So that means the thing that is prominent, that is mostly there, the most common ones, in an area in general or over a long period. The characteristics include temperature, wind velocity, humidity, precipitation, etc. Some examples, I've put the Mediterranean dry climate have very wet winters and dry summers, whereas the climate of rainforests tend to be extremely humid and hot. You could have put many different climates. Non-examples, well, I thought it was quite hard to think of a non-example. It's like, what's not climate? Traffic isn't climate. It can affect it. Shoes aren't climate. Shoes are definitely not climate. And now we're moving on to our next word, which is to redevelop. Now, this word simply means to develop something again, and we've recently been looking at words from design and technology, so you'll know about innovation and the reasons for developing something in a new sense. Now, redevelop can be a good thing or it can be a bad thing. So, for example, gentrification exists, and if you don't know what that is where in a poor area, somebody will buy a plot of buildings, turn them into very expensive flats and sell them for an awful lot of money. And it means a lot of the time, though it does bring business and things to an area, a lot of the time it means that house prices rise. So people need to move out of areas that they've been for a very long time. And it kind of disrupts communities and pushes them away. But another form of redevelopment is when you redevelop an area with the intention of the people who live there still living there, just to provide them with better facilities, better housing, better transport links, maybe just a better standard of living within that community. And obviously those communities that I'm talking about are the ones that are disadvantaged or don't have access to things that we believe that most people should have access to, such as safe and healthy housing. So could you attempt the Freya model for redevelop and pause this video, please? Okay, and I've got the definition down as to develop something again, usually with the intention of improving it, as we discussed in the design and technology video. There's not much point doing something again unless it's to improve it. The characteristics of redeveloping, I've put that it's often associated with houses, I've mentioned gentrification, and I've mentioned it being to improve standards of living. Examples would be regeneration of areas to provide better housing, facilities and transport. And non-examples would be leaving the areas in the same condition. Finally, we're going to discuss conservation. Conservation is massively important and something that's close to my heart because it is the protection of things found in nature, and for many reasons those things are now endangered. When I say things, I might mean trees, plants, animals, whole species, natural habitats, and so on. So you've probably heard quite a lot about conservation, about the attempts to make sure that animals are safe and don't die out, to stop hunting, to halt the climate crisis, etc. So can you bring some of that knowledge that you've previously got around conservation and use it to try and fill out this Freya model, please? Excellent, and you'll see what I have put down. So I have got as definition, conservation is the protection of things found in nature. The characteristics of conservation, I have got, it requires the sensible use of all Earth's natural resources, water, soil, minerals, wildlife and forests. People who care about conservation try to reserve natural resources so that they will still be around in the future. For examples, I have got using a reusable water bottle, recycling, planting more trees, eating a plant-based diet, so that's like veganism, and walking instead of driving. Some non-examples would be using lots of single-use plastic, so that's when you throw it out after every time you've used it, leaving the water running for ages, leaving electric items on when you aren't using them. And that was the last of our words. So that brings us on to spellings. So if you could spell climate for me, please. And spell redevelop. And spell conservation. I think these are a little bit easier than last week's spellings. See how you did. Still your first attempt, so even if they're a little bit easier than last week's, that's because last week's were pretty nightmarish spellings, so don't worry if you're struggling with some of these. Just try and see where you've gone wrong there. And then if you cover what you've previously written and try again, we'll write climate. Redevelop. And conservation. Fantastic. And then check for a final time before we spell them for a final time. I suppose you're checking them for a penultimate time, actually. That means time before final. So check all of these, really concentrate on them before we go into the final spellings. Okay, and if you could spell climate. Redevelop. And conservation. Fantastic, and you can check these as you move into the definition and dual code round. And if you could write out the correct spellings of the word along with a definition in your own words and complete the symbol. So if you pause while you do that. And then that is it from me today. I will be back next week with some more academic vocabulary. Until then, have a wonderful, wonderful week. Thank you for joining us for another week on Macmo Literacy. If you enjoy starting with a word and then ending up in a rambling journey to who knows where, then I suggest that you hit like and subscribe. Also, if you just want to be a pal, like and subscribe. See you next week.